After Joshua handed me over to his twin brother, I finally understood something painful. The man I'd been married to for 3 years had never loved me. His heart belonged to my sister. "I don't love you," Joshua told me coldly. "The family forced this marriage. If you want kids, you can have them with Jackson." I was stunned. But when I showed him a pregnancy report later, his calm mask slipped. His eyes turned red with emotion. "You've fallen in love with my brother, haven't you?" he asked. I didn't answer. Before I could, there was a knock on the door behind me. A lazy voice, unmistakably Jackson's, called out, "Sister-in-law, open the door." It's me. For 3 long years, Joshua had been distant, almost like a stranger. He never touched me. He claimed he couldn't break his Buddhist vows, so we slept in separate rooms. I told myself to keep my distance too. But everything changed when his carefree twin, Jackson, returned from abroad. One night, I overheard them talking. "You can take my place with Irene," Joshua said, his tone indifferent, as if he were discussing someone he barely knew. Jackson's reply was teasing but sharp. "Have you been meditating too much, or are you just stupid? She's your wife, not mine." There was a pause, and then Jackson added with a mocking laugh, "Wait, is this because you can't?" Joshua cut him off calmly, fingering his white jade rosary. "No," he said. "I simply don't have feelings for her." That one sentence hit me like a slap. I couldn't move. Jackson snapped the brush he was holding, his casual demeanor suddenly gone. "Really? Then who do you love, if not her?" Joshua hesitated, and my heart raced as I waited for his answer. Then, he finally said a name I knew all too well, Christina. Christina, my cousin, the girl everyone adored, the nation's first love. She had retired and moved overseas 3 years ago. Hearing her name brought back a flood of memories. I had known Joshua since we were kids. Back then, he was kind but distant. In junior high, he got seriously ill and went to a temple to recover. We lost touch until our senior year of high school when he sent me a letter. I still remember opening it, my heart pounding as I saw his neat handwriting. I thought it was his way of asking me to visit him, so I went to the temple with my homework, hoping to see him. When we met, he was dressed in white, looking as calm and untouchable as ever. But the first thing he did was look behind me. "Did you come alone?" he asked, disappointment flickering in his eyes. I didn't understand his reaction and pulled out the letter. "Didn't you write this for me?" He frowned, clearly uncomfortable, but quickly covered it up. Instead of answering, he led me around the temple. 10 minutes later, we were back at the entrance. "That's enough," he said. "You can go now." I didn't understand why he seemed so distant. All I wanted was to spend time with him, but he treated me like a guest he couldn't wait to send away. Years later, it all made sense. The letter wasn't meant for me. His heart had always belonged to Christina, not me. Jackson stopped in his tracks and glanced at me. His long legs made quick work of the stairs, taking 3 at a time. The summer breeze carried his words as he muttered, "Not telling." I rolled my eyes and hurried to catch up with him. He was dressed in all black, carrying his violin case with that familiar, carefree attitude. "No need to tell," he said again as we reached the temple gates. Joshua was already waiting there. The moment his eyes landed on Jackson beside me, his expression turned icy. "Why did you bring him here?" he snapped. Before I could explain, Jackson smirked. "Can't I come?" he shot back, shoving past Joshua and walking into the temple without a care. The visit didn't get any better from there. While Jackson was in the bathroom, Joshua stood beside me, his voice cold and sharp. "Next time, bring a girl with you." I frowned, confused. "Why? Are you that biased about who can come here?" After a pause, he looked down at me and said something that stopped me in my tracks. Because I'm jealous. His bluntness caught me off guard. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Was my quiet crush finally being returned? Excited, I shared this moment with Christina, my cousin and closest friend. I even invited her to come along on the next visit, and she agreed. But when Joshua saw me and Christina together, his entire demeanor changed. His eyes lit up, not for me, but for her. At the time, I thought he was happy because I hadn't brought Jackson. Now, looking back, I realized the truth. Joshua only melted when Christina was around. I didn't understand this until 3 years into our marriage. Standing outside Joshua's study, my chest felt tight. Tears welled up and my heart ached like someone was stabbing it. I finally asked the question that had haunted me for years. Joshua, you never loved me, did you? Then why did you marry me? I sat on the couch, trying to hold back my tears, but they spilled over anyway. Joshua appeared in the living room, tall and silent, his cold gaze fixed on me. After what felt like forever, he finally broke the silence. Are you done crying? Let's talk business. I wiped my tears quickly and walked up to him. On tiptoe, I tried to kiss him, desperate for even a shred of affection, but he pushed me away so hard that I hit the corner of the table. Pain shot through my waist, but it was nothing compared to the disgust in his eyes. I told you on our wedding day, he said, his voice sharp and unfeeling. I can't break my vows because of Buddhism. What are you trying to do? I stumbled, barely holding back a sob. What if Christina were standing in front of you? I challenged. Joshua froze. His face turned red, and his grip on the jade rosary in his hand tightened. For a moment, he looked lost in thought. Irene, don't make this into something it's not, he said, his voice cracking just slightly. Whatever's between us has nothing to do with her. I laughed bitterly. Nothing to do with her? Isn't it her that you love? The panic in his eyes gave him away. Did you hear that? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Without waiting for me to respond, he sighed and said, Fine. I'll tell you the truth. I don't love you. This marriage was forced by the family. If you want kids, have them with Jackson. He looks just like me, so it shouldn't be a problem. His words cut through me like a knife, shattering the love I'd carried for him over 15 years. His tone so casual, so indifferent made me feel like a fool. Tears blurred my vision as I glanced up and saw Jackson standing on the stairs. We hadn't seen each other in 3 years. He still had the same sharp features, full of rebellion, while I stood there, broken. Joshua noticed him too. I've already told Irene. You can stay here tonight, he said flatly before walking away without even a glance in my direction. Once he was gone, I lost it. My anger boiled over, and I smashed every antique in the living room. When I was too exhausted to continue, I collapsed on the floor, sobbing into my hands. That's when Jackson came down the stairs. He crouched next to me, his usual carefree demeanor replaced by quiet concern. Still feeling like smashing things? Jackson asked, his tone light but full of concern. I'll buy replacements for whatever you broke. I sniffled, shaking my head as I tried to smile. No, I'm fine. I'm just embarrassed you had to see all this, especially since it's been so long. He gave me a long look, his expression unreadable. Where are you staying tonight? I can arrange for a driver to take you back, I offered, hoping to change the subject. Jackson raised an eyebrow, his gaze locking with mine. Didn't Joshua already tell you? I'm staying here tonight. I froze, staring at him blankly. What? Are you serious? That's ridiculous. Why not? He asked, his voice uncharacteristically serious. The sudden shift startled me. Because I'm your sister-in-law, I stammered. Jackson knelt in front of me suddenly, closing the space between us. So what? He said, his tone steady yet intense. I panicked, standing up quickly to put some distance between us, but he caught me effortlessly, pulling me into a bear hug. Jackson, are you crazy? I yelled, squirming in his arms. He let out a soft laugh, setting me back down on the couch with surprising gentleness. Relax, I'm just trying to help. You were so heartbroken earlier, I thought you might have forgotten how to cry, he teased. Now, stay put while I clean up. As he busied himself tidying the room, I noticed Joshua's tablet on the sofa. On impulse, I picked it up and typed in Christina's birthday. The screen unlocked immediately. Curiosity tugged at me, and I opened his messages. Sure enough, Christina was the only pinned conversation. My chest tightened as I read through their texts. What if Irene's not pregnant? She has to be. Sorry, I didn't think her body couldn't miscarry. It's okay. It's my fault. I shouldn't have proposed to her impulsively back then. Now my parents like her so much. It's hard to get a divorce. It's your fault. That night was a mess. I told you to use protection, but you insisted it was fine. Now look at this mess. Don't be mad. When Irene's child is born, I'll make sure it becomes ours. I stared at the screen, my face pale. It all made sense now, Joshua's sudden proposal, his insistence on having a child. It wasn't about me. It was all for Christina. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a message from her. Irene, I'm back in the country. When can we meet? I couldn't bring myself to reply. Instead, I looked at Jackson, who was still sweeping the floor. Joshua's words from earlier echoed in my mind. He looks just like me. You shouldn't have a problem accepting him. But they were nothing alike. Jackson was cleaning the floor. Joshua wouldn't even lift a finger for that. Sensing my gaze, Jackson walked over, his eyebrows raised. What's up? Are you feeling okay? Even the way he cared was different. Joshua would never ask me that. The tears I'd been holding back spilled over again. Jackson panicked, kneeling beside me and gently wiping my tears. Hey, why are you crying again? Don't worry, I'll talk to Joshua after I'm done here, okay? And honestly, if things don't work out with him, maybe it's time to move on. You've seen how many couples pretend to get along but are completely distant. You don't have to keep clinging to him. His words struck a chord, and the dam I'd been holding back broke. All my frustrations, my heartbreak poured out. You don't understand. I've liked him for 15 years. Why does he treat me like this? Jackson reached out hesitantly, brushing away the tears at the corners of my eyes. I get it. How about we go for a drive to clear your head? It'll help. It reminded me of the old days when he'd take me out on his electric scooter, letting the wind and our conversations lighten my heart. But this time, I shook my head. Not now. I'm tired. And I think I bruised my back when Joshua pushed me. Jackson froze, then reached out instinctively to check. His hand stopped just short of lifting my shirt. Can I look? If it's bad, I'll take you to the hospital, he said softly. His eyes were filled with such genuine concern that I nodded without thinking. Slowly, he lifted the hem of my shirt, and the bruise on my side came into view. His expression darkened as he stared at it, a storm brewing in his eyes. Jackson's hand tightened into a fist as he stared at the bruise on the edge of the couch. He looked at it for a long time, lost in thought. I felt my face heat up for no reason and started to take off my shirt. Before I could, Jackson stood up on his own and walked over to the medicine cabinet, grabbing a small bottle of herbal oil. Lie down, he said gently. I hesitated for a moment, watching him rub his hands together, warming the oil. Finally, I lay down on the couch, unsure of what to expect. In the reflection of the French window across the room, I could see his every movement. With his tall frame and long legs, Jackson knelt on one knee beside the couch. Slowly, he bent down and carefully lifted my shirt, exposing the bruise on my lower back. The next thing I felt was warmth spreading across my skin. It was so hot it made my muscles tighten, and I instinctively turned to get away. Jackson stopped and looked up, meeting my gaze through the window's reflection. "Does it hurt?" he asked, his voice low and a little rough. His question made my face flush. Embarrassed, I buried my face in my arms and mumbled, "Just go easy, okay?" He chuckled softly, the sound teasing but not unkind. I was about to ask what he found so funny when his hands returned to my back, this time with a gentler touch. I forced myself to stay still, gripping the pillow under my head so tightly that my knuckles turned white. With my head buried, every other sense seemed to sharpen. I could feel my skin reacting to his hands, tensing at first, then relaxing as he kneaded the sore spot. His breath sounded heavier than usual, and the faint scent of soap clung to him, soft but noticeable. Each time he pressed a little harder, his knee brushed against the side of my thigh. The whole moment felt oddly intimate, making the air around us seem thinner. It was hard to breathe. Then, suddenly, my phone rang, snapping me out of the moment like a splash of cold water. I fumbled to answer. "Hello?" It was Joshua. "Don't stay with Jackson too late," he said. "We're having dinner at the old house tomorrow." I tried to steady my voice. "Okay, got it." But my tone rose unexpectedly as Jackson, oblivious to the call, pressed harder on my back. "Ouch," I yelped, glaring at him. "Can't you go easy?" Jackson blinked at me innocently. "I didn't mean to hurt you, Irene." His expression was so exaggerated it was almost funny. Joshua's voice came through the phone again, now tinged with suspicion. "What are you doing with my brother?" I knew he had gotten the wrong idea, but decided not to explain. Instead, I smirked and teased. "What does it matter to you? Isn't this what you wanted?" As soon as I said it, Jackson leaned in, his chin almost brushing my shoulder. I froze. His breath tickled my ear as he spoke. "Brother, don't worry. I'll take care of her." Then, to my surprise, his fingers gently tickled my side, making me flinch. "Stop it!" I hissed, grabbing his hand and accidentally scratching his forearm in the process. He laughed softly. "Still so fierce, huh? You're wild like this." Blushing furiously, I snapped, "Shut up. I don't want to hear another word from you." He grinned, but didn't let go of my waist. His touch left me tongue-tied, and I could barely think straight. Joshua, still on the other end of the call, didn't say a word. At some point, the line went dead, but I hadn't even noticed. The next morning, Jackson insisted on making breakfast. "Trust me," he said, tying a pink apron around his waist. "I've mastered 5-star chef skills overseas." He moved confidently around the kitchen, flipping pancakes and scrambling eggs. Every so often, he'd turn to me, sitting on the couch, and make a silly face. It was impossible not to laugh. Joshua had never done anything like this. He was always distant, barely looking at me. Watching Jackson, I knew I could never mistake the two of them. They couldn't have been more different. Jackson waved me over, calling out, "Irene, come taste the spaghetti your amazing brother just cooked." "I'm coming," I reply, moving carefully since my lower back was still sore. He handed me a forkful of spaghetti, holding it up close to my mouth. "Try it," he urged, his face full of pride. I paused, my hand halfway to the fork, then gave up and let him feed me. I quickly ate the bite, stepping back to create a little space between us. "It's good," I said honestly, "but it's missing salt." Jackson's hopeful smile froze, and his pride seemed to deflate in an instant. After a brief moment of silence, he scratched the back of his head awkwardly. Looks like I forgot the salt. I was about to console him when he suddenly formed a heart with his hands and said dramatically, "Because my love for you needs no seasoning." Before I could respond, Joshua walked in, his tall, lean frame silhouetted in the doorway. The white jade Buddhist beads on his wrist swayed slightly as he entered, his gaze calm but unreadable. His eyes landed on my hand, which was still resting on my lower back. 15 years of liking me, and now you've moved on to my brother. Remarkable, Irene, he said, his tone sharp and dripping with sarcasm. His comment struck me as so absurd that I couldn't help but laugh. You're still alive, aren't you? Should I be mourning you for 3 years? I shot back, smirking. Joshua's expression hardened, his lips pressing into a thin line. He clearly misunderstood the situation, but instead of clearing it up, I decided to tease him further. I lightly tapped my waist and said with mock seriousness, "Besides, isn't this what you wanted? If I do get pregnant, will the kid call you dad or uncle?" Something in my words seemed to hit a nerve. His face stayed blank, but his eyes darkened as he looked at me. Jackson, always ready to stir the pot, rested his hand on my waist and grinned mischievously. "Call him Dad," he said cheerfully. "Since we look so alike, we'll just take turns raising the kid. What do you think?" Joshua's gaze dropped to the floor, his long eyelashes casting shadows over his expression. "Do whatever you want," he said coldly before turning and heading to the study. I swatted Jackson's hand away. "The show's over. You can let go now." But instead of letting go, he tightened his hold, pulling me into an embrace. I pushed against his chest, but it was no use. All I accomplished was realizing just how firm his chest muscles were. After a moment, he leaned down, his face close to mine. "After that performance, don't I deserve a reward?" I froze, suddenly feeling flustered. "What kind of reward?" He smirked. "I've been your model. Now, I want you to paint a portrait of me." I stiffened, an awkward laugh escaping. "Can't you ask for something else? I haven't painted in years. It had been 5 years since I last touched a brush. My graduation project had been accused of plagiarism, a design I'd poured my heart into. But somehow, someone else published a nearly identical design just 2 weeks before me. I had no way to prove it was my work. In the end, I lost my degree, my reputation, and any chance of a future in the art world. The whole school ridiculed me, and I became a laughingstock. After that, I swore I'd never paint again. Well, almost. There was one exception. On Christina's 25th birthday, she begged me to paint her portrait, insisting it was just a fun way to celebrate our friendship. I refused repeatedly, but she pouted and said, "Irene, don't you see me as a sister?" Her words left me speechless. Joshua, who had been folding origami cranes nearby, looked up and said in his usual icy tone, "It's just a painting. Why are you making it a big deal?" Biting my lip, I eventually agreed, but only on one condition. "Promise you won't post it online," I told her. She promised. But that same night, after I finished the painting, I found out she had shared it on social media anyway. Her caption read, "Thank you, Irene, for the beautiful birthday gift. I love it." The post went viral, and my past resurfaced. People dug up the plagiarism accusations and flooded the comments with warnings to Christina, telling her to stay away from me. Christina's betrayal had dragged me back into the spotlight I'd been desperately trying to avoid. That night, I realized I'd never truly escaped my past. "I'm sorry, Irene. Your painting was just too beautiful. I couldn't resist posting it on Weibo," Christina said, holding my hand and swinging it gently in an apologetic way. I lowered my gaze, staring at our hands, now tangled together. It was the first time I had spoken harshly to her. "I'm not in a good mood right now. Can you please leave me alone for a while?" I added. Christina stood there, shocked, not knowing what to say. Without another word, I turned and walked home. As soon as I stepped inside, my father and stepmother were already yelling at me. Why did you have to show off? Who cares if you can paint? If I had known you'd bring shame to us like this, I would have broken your hands back then. My stepmother shouted, Irene, your father worked hard to cover up the plagiarism incident, and now you've caused another mess. Do you think our family has endless money? My father's voice was cold and harsh. Every word felt like a slap to my back, making me shrink further. The proud, carefree girl I once was seemed to disappear, replaced by someone smaller and quieter. From that day on, I barely spoke. When Joshua saw me again, he raised an eyebrow, surprised. You've changed a lot. I forced a smile. I have no choice. I can't afford to embarrass my family like I used to. In the end, I made up with Christina, but the closeness we once shared was gone. Now, whenever Jackson brings up the painting incident, I try to avoid it. But one day, he looked at me seriously. His dark eyes filled with so much emotion. Irene, you once said you wanted to be a great painter, he said. I blinked, holding back tears. The shame of the plagiarism accusation weighed on me. I don't believe you plagiarized, Jackson said firmly. The designer who accused you disappeared after that, and someone transferred $3 million to his account. I don't think that's a coincidence. You're not wrong. Jackson's words made all the tears I had been holding back spill out. I finally realized that someone believed in me. I agreed to paint for him, but not just yet. On the day the truth is revealed, paint me first, he said. At lunch, back at the old house, Joshua's mom brought up her wish for grandchildren. I froze, and without thinking, I glanced at Jackson's dad, who was sitting nearby playing chess. He sat upright, his usual lazy demeanor gone. His long fingers gently caressed a smooth black stone, as if on purpose. Suddenly, I remembered the way his fingers had brushed my waist the night before. Just then, he looked up and tilted his head slightly in my direction. The small gesture caught me off guard, and I quickly looked away. But in doing so, I accidentally met Joshua's gaze. Normally, I would have smiled at him, but now I instinctively furrowed my brow and looked away. He clenched his grip on the bead necklace in his hand, clearly upset. After dinner, Jackson came home with us, but as we reached the door, Joshua blocked it. Your room is not here, he said, his voice cold. Jackson smiled and pushed past him, standing beside me. I know, but I have to stay with my sister. You forgot. You told me yesterday we should have a baby with her. Joshua didn't answer. He just stared at me, but I meekly linked my arm with Jackson's and waved at Joshua. Go out and play. Don't disturb us. A couple of seconds later, Joshua left, the door slamming behind him. I stood there, confused. Was he angry? But isn't this what he wanted? Before I could think too much about it, Jackson pulled me away, and we booked a flight abroad. I was planning to confront the designer, Mike, who had accused me of plagiarism. But when we arrived, I found out Mike had been in a car accident a few days earlier and didn't make it. I stood outside the hospital for a long time, the cold wind biting at my face. Then, suddenly, Jackson appeared in front of me, blocking the wind. It's okay. There must be another way, he said softly. I nodded, letting the wind mess up my hair. My vision blurred, and for a moment, I felt disconnected from everything around me. Just then, a voice called out, Mr. Joshua. Both Jackson and I turned to see a middle-aged woman not far away. It was Mike's wife. I quickly pulled up my mask, staying silent. She hurried over and bowed to Jackson, speaking carefully. I thought you weren't coming since you didn't answer my calls. You're our benefactor. Mike wanted to see you one last time, but he didn't get the chance. Jackson looked taken aback at first, but quickly regained his composure. His gaze turned cold and distant, and his posture became more formal. In that moment, I almost called out to him. He was learning well. Mike's wife hesitated for a moment before shyly glancing at Jackson. Mike didn't leave much behind when he passed. "It's hard for me and the child to survive here. Mr. Joshua, could you help us with another 3 million?" Jackson looked down at her, cold and silent. The tension in the air was thick. She nervously rubbed her hands. "It's okay if you don't want to help, but Mike left some things behind that might end up with your wife, Irene. That could turn out to be a big mess." When she mentioned my name, my heart sank. I was starting to realize something wasn't right. "Joshua, what have you done behind my back?" I thought. "Money isn't the issue," Jackson said, his voice low and laced with displeasure. "But this is the last time. Give me what you have, and I'll destroy it personally. If you keep a backup, I'll make sure you end up like Mike." "Of course," she replied, pulling out a flash drive. Jackson connected it to his phone and checked the files inside. It contained phone recordings and chat logs. Suddenly, Mike's wife seemed to notice something. "Why aren't you wearing your prayer beads today?" Jackson's finger paused, and he barely lifted an eyelid. "It's cold," he said flatly. His hands were stiff. "Tomorrow, the 3 million will be transferred to your account. Keep it hidden and get out of here," he added. With those words, he turned and hurried off, and I quickly followed him. When Mike's wife heard the last part, she seemed to forget all doubts, her mind only on the money. She even warmly escorted us out. On the way back to the hotel, I listened to the recordings on the flash drive. One was a conversation between Joshua and Mike. 3 million don't bother Christina anymore, or I won't hesitate to take a life. Another was Christina speaking with Mike. "I've sent you Irene's drafts. Just make some changes and post them quickly. Remember, make a big fuss." I sat on the bed, staring blankly, the words echoing in my head. The weight of the recordings pressed down on me, making my chest tight. "Christina, why would you do this?" "Joshua, what went wrong with you?" But Jackson's knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. I opened it, and there he stood, looking worried as he checked if I was okay. When he saw I was fine, he visibly relaxed. "I thought you'd be crying your eyes out in here," he said. I blinked my dry eyes, offering a bitter smile. "I'm too miserable to even cry." "Don't worry, I'm fine. Go back to sleep. We have a plane to catch tomorrow." Jackson hesitated for a moment, then took a step back, pointing behind him. "Should I really go back?" I chuckled at his antics. "Yes, go back. Good night." He turned and left, but just as he was about to go, I grabbed the hem of his shirt. "Thank you." He didn't turn around, just said, "No need to thank me. It's a brother's duty to protect his sister." The next day, when I rushed back home, I could hear a woman's giggles coming from inside the house. It was Christina. She was sitting on Joshua's lap, her cheeks flushed. When she saw me, she casually stood up, greeting me with a smile. "Irene, you're back." As she moved, a string of jade beads slipped from her skirt. They sparkled with a watery sheen, and I recognized them immediately. It was the 18th birthday gift I had given Joshua. Now they were just being treated like this. If this had happened in the past, I would have been heartbroken. But surprisingly, I didn't care as much anymore. After 3 years of not seeing each other, Christina still rushed over to grab my arm like she used to. "Why didn't you reply to my messages? I was worried about you, so I came to find you." Ended up hanging out with Joshua for a while. Despite everything that had happened, they were still pretending in front of me. Without a word, I pulled my arm away, pushing her off with a firm shove. She fell to the ground with a thud. "Christina." Joshua immediately rushed over, helping her up. He turned to me, angry. "Irene, are you out of your mind?" Apologize to her. I didn't hesitate. It's impossible. This was the first time I'd ever spoken back to him like this. Joshua stared at me, his eyes full of confusion. Then he sneered. "Are you throwing a tantrum at me, Irene? That's unnecessary. You know I don't love you. Your little tricks will only make me dislike you more." I looked at his face, feeling lost. I had liked Joshua for 15 years, whether it was his cheerful, lively self when we were young, or the quiet, obedient man he had become after marriage. But he had never once smiled at me. In front of me, he was like a cold, frozen lake, unaffected by anything I did to try and please him. This was the first time he had smiled at me, but it was a smile filled with mockery. It was mocking the me who used to constantly change myself for him. I sighed, feeling calm despite the hurt. "You're overthinking it, Joshua. You don't even deserve my anger anymore." And then I said the words I never thought I would. "Let's get a divorce." The surprise in his eyes was immediate. It was clear he didn't expect me to take the first step. "Irene," he said, his voice soft but filled with disbelief. "This isn't funny." I shook my head. "I'm not joking. You like my cousin, right? Once we're divorced, you can marry her." Joshua stared at me, looking for any sign that I was lying or pretending. But I just looked back at him quietly. "What? Don't you want to marry her?" I asked. Christina suddenly looked up at him, her eyes full of hope. Joshua hesitated, then grabbed her hand, interlocking their fingers. He looked at me, his expression cold. "Don't try to mess with our relationship, Irene. We can divorce, but you need to tell my parents you changed your mind. I don't want them to think badly of me. And Christina's just made a comeback in the entertainment industry. We can't afford any scandal." I fell silent. For the first time, I could only think of one word to describe Joshua: shameless. He knew his parents liked me a lot. It was his fault we were in this mess. But now he wanted me to take the blame. Just then, Jackson, who had been standing beside me, muttered under his breath, "What a hassle to get a divorce." He was right. Joshua wasn't even owning up to his mistakes. "You're not their only son," Jackson added, pulling out his phone. In a swift move, he posted a picture of Joshua and Christina holding hands in the family group chat, along with a voice message. "Joshua cheated, brought his mistress home, and wants to divorce my sister-in-law." Joshua moved quickly to stop him, but it was too late. The photo and message were already sent. Soon, the four of us were called to the family estate. As we entered, Joshua's dad's stern voice rang out. "Joshua, kneel down." But Joshua didn't move. He stood boldly in the center of the room and said, "I'm not wrong. I just found someone I truly like." Before he could finish his sentence, Joshua's dad's belt cracked across his back. "Then why the hell did you marry Irene in the first place? She's a good girl. Why the hell did you play around?" Seeing Joshua being hit, Christina rushed over immediately, her voice shaking. "Don't hit him. If you hurt him, your grandson will be heartbroken." She placed a hand on her stomach and added, "I'm pregnant with Joshua's child." Joshua's parents exchanged a long, cold stare before turning their eyes on me. Finally, Joshua's mom gritted her teeth and said sharply, "Then go ahead and hit him. Our family doesn't accept illegitimate children. The only grandchild I recognize is the one from Irene." Joshua's mom spoke with disgust. "Mom, I don't like her. If you keep pushing this grandchild from her, then your son is useless." Amid the chaos, I remained calm and spoke up. "Mom, let's get a divorce. If I remarry and have children, you can call them your grandchildren." They tried to persuade me, but my mind was made up. The divorce was going to happen. With reluctance in their eyes, Joshua and I signed our divorce papers. That afternoon, Christina couldn't wait to announce it on Instagram. She posted a picture of them holding hands, probably hoping it would bring attention to her career comeback. Joshua, who had never used Weibo, even made an account just to comment, "Hello, my wife." The two became an instant sensation, with everyone calling them sweet and romantic. But not everyone was on board. Some reminded the public that Joshua had been married before, and others dug up past scandals, like when I was accused of plagiarism. Even though it was their moment, I was being dragged back into the spotlight. Christina messaged me, saying, "Irene, thank you for giving Joshua back to me. When we get married, can you be my bridesmaid?" I was stunned by her audacity. So I decided to send her a recording of a conversation I had with Mike's wife. I let Christina listen to the recording. "Do you still want me to be your bridesmaid?" I asked coldly. The once confident Christina, now trembling, begged for forgiveness. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to frame you. Please, can you delete the recording?" Joshua stood there, looking angry, and yelled at me, "Enough, Irene. Christina has apologized. What more do you want?" I replied firmly. "First, if she apologizes, I have the right not to accept it. And secondly, don't think I'll just let you off the hook." I released the recording of you and Mike. Joshua's face, once calm, twisted with panic. He reached for my hand, but I slapped it away. The sting in my hand didn't matter as I stared at him, furious. Why didn't Christina let me go when she plotted against me over and over again? I snapped. Do I owe her anything? And you? Why are you arguing with her instead of defending me? Joshua lowered his head, his pride shattered, and muttered, "I'm sorry," over and over. I was done dealing with him. I exposed everything to the public. At the height of Christina's comeback, she spiraled into scandal. People turned against her, and she became a target of hate. She cursed me, calling me despicable. "Irene, you're just as despicable as your mother. She ruined my mom, and now you're ruining me. Our family is cursed with you and your mother," she screamed. "And let me tell you the truth, I've never liked Joshua. I just wanted to steal your man, just like your mother tried to steal my dad." It was then that I learned why Christina hated me so much. Her mother, who was my aunt, had been in love with the same man as my mother. My aunt used tricks to trap that man into marrying her after getting pregnant, but their marriage was a disaster. Eventually, the man took his own life. He had a drawer full of sketches, every one of them drawn of my mother. When my dad found out, he completely cut ties with my mom and with me, the daughter who was learning art. My mom, heartbroken and alone, ended her life by jumping into a river. Both families were torn apart. I thought Christina and I were unaffected by all this, but it turned out she had never forgotten. But that was fine. She better not mess with me again. I wasn't done with her yet. After clearing my name, I finally reclaimed my degree certificate. The first painting I picked up my brush for, as promised, was given to Jackson. By the time I finished the painting, it was already dusk. The soft glow of the sunset outside the window bathed Jackson's face in warm light. "Let me take you for a ride on my bike," he suggested. This time, I didn't refuse. I climbed onto the back of his electric bike, the faint scent of laundry detergent from his clothes carried by the evening breeze. It felt like so many times before, but this time was different. I didn't cry or pour my heart out to him. Instead, he asked, "Why did you like my brother in the first place?" I was caught off guard. Thinking about it, I couldn't really explain how I had fallen for him. All I knew was that by the time I realized I had feelings for him, I couldn't stop myself. It was like being caught up in the occasional kindness he showed me, even if it felt more like charity. If I had to pick a reason, maybe it was because his grades were so good at the time. It started with admiration, but over time, it turned into something deeper, probably love. Jackson fell silent, then added, at the beginning, I really hated studying. Now, I'm doing well. Do you want to like me now? I looked up at him, watching as his ears and the back of his neck turned red. I've been your sister-in-law before, I reminded him. So what? He said, his voice still calm. Didn't we get divorced? I fell quiet, memories of our past flashing in my mind. After thinking for a moment, I reached a conclusion: he was worth it. But it was too soon. I had just gotten divorced. Jackson immediately understood. Okay, I'll wait for you, he said, a teasing smile on his face. I've already reserved a spot for your second marriage. At 30, I decided to remarry Jackson. But due to a careless mistake, I ended up pregnant. When he brought the pregnancy test results to the table, his parents were so happy they couldn't stop smiling. Meanwhile, Joshua, who had been dumped by Christina, stood in the corner, staring at me. He waited for his chance, then cornered me in the upstairs room. He pulled out the birthday gift I had once given him. Irene, I cleaned it, he said. I frowned, disgust clear in my eyes. It's dirty. Take it away. Joshua froze, his eyes turning red as his gaze shifted to my stomach. You're really pregnant? He asked. I let out a small laugh. Yes, just like you wanted. But you won't get the chance to trade Christina's child for mine. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. All he could do was ask dryly, Have you really fallen for my brother? I didn't answer. I just looked at him like he was out of his mind. Suddenly, the door behind me knocked. Hey, sister-in-law, it's me, my brother, Jackson's carefree voice called out. Then, with a grin, he added, No, wait. Fiancé opened the door. I'm here to pick you up. I gave Joshua a polite smile, turned around and opened the door. I threw myself into Jackson's arms, and he hugged me tightly. Then, looking at Joshua, who looked exactly like him, Jackson smirked. Thanks for giving up, brother. It's because of that I had the chance to step in and marry her. With a playful kiss on my lips, Jackson continued, You'll be at the head table at our wedding, right? And by the way, brother, don't forget to come. You'll be the uncle to our kids one day. I turned to look at Joshua, his regret clear in his eyes.